Tan Rabbanan, bottom of Ayin Chesam and Beis, a number of lines up. Tan Rabbanan, Hamoitzi Shtar Chayv Ad Shaloi Paru. So we're talking about carrying out on Shabbos the shtar, a loan document. So the loan document Ad Shaloi Paru, the Brisa says, until it was paid, so it's still useful. Chayiv. Then you'd be chayiv for carrying it on Shabbos. But Misha Paru, once it's been paid, so it no longer has a use. Potter. The Tanna Kama says you're potter for carrying it on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer.
You still erase it though.
No, but we said erased thing doesn't have. You can't use erased. Use it in the bottle. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says Af Mishaparu Chayiv. Even after it's paid, you're still chayiv. We're on the bottom of Ayin Chesam and Beis. Even after it's been paid, you're still chayiv. You still need it. So similar to the Gemara yesterday, we have machlekes between the Tanna Kama saying you don't need it, Rabbi Yehuda saying you do need it. So what's the difference between them? What's the machlekes? Amar Rabbi Yoseph. Rabbi Yoseph explains Asur lishay shtar perua ike benayu. The difference between the Rabbanon and the Rabbi Yehuda here is whether or not it's asur to hold on to a paid loan document. Rabbanon Savri Asur L'Shei Shtar Perua. Rabbanon hold that once a document has been paid, once the borrower paid back the money, it's asur for the lender to hold on to the shtar because maybe he's going to use it to collect again. Maybe he'll forget. Not saying that he's dishonest, just he might forget, and a while later he may pull it out again and try to collect the money. So the Rabbanan hold, it's usher for him to hold on to this loan document. Rabbi Yehuda says, Mutter l'shay shtar perua, you're allowed to hold on to a loan document even after it's been paid. I guess he's not worried. So since you're allowed to hold on to it, for whatever reason, you could use it to cover your bottle, like as a bottle cap. It has a use, so you'll be chayav for carrying it on Shabbos. That's one way to explain this machlokes. Abaya explains the machlokes as following: the kuli alma asur l'shay shtar perua. Everybody holds that it's asur to hold on to a shtar, a loan document, once it's been paid, for the reason we explained. V'hacha, over here, what's the argument between the Rabbanan and the Rabbi Yehuda? B'mayde b'shtar shekasvu shetzarich l'kaimai kamiflagi. Whether or the argument is like this: if every time you have a loan document, the lender has a loan, holds on to it, holds on to the shtar, and he pulls it out and says to the borrower, to the loiva, you owe me money. So the loiva always has the right to say, or he has the ability to say, it's forged. It's not true. This document is forged. So the process is based on the Eidim. We could call the Eidim to testify that their signatures are indeed accurate, and it'll give validity to this shtar. But we have over here a case where he doesn't say mezuyif, rather the loiva says what mezuyif is, it's forged. Forged. So rather we have the loiva saying over here, the document, I admit that the document is valid, it is a real loan document, and I did borrow the money. So at that point, do we still need the loiva to admit that he still owes it? Like, in other words, let's say he says it's a good document, but I paid it. So do we believe him to say, just like we believed him, there's a concept called Pesha Asar Hua Pesha Hitter, the same mouth that makes him chayiv to pay the loan because he agreed that he borrowed the money. That's what we're basing it on. So we'll also believe him to say that Hua Pesha Hitter, he should be the same mouth to say that he paid the money. So the machlokes over here between the Tanna Kama and the Rabbanon, the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda is, once the loiva says that the shtar is a good shtar, do we need to do another step? At that point, could the malveh use it against the loiva to pay, or do you still need the loiva to admit that he owes the money? Do you still need to be mekayim it? Do you still need to call upon the edim or to say that this is a good shtar and still unpaid? So let's see. Tanna Kama savar moide b'shtar shekasvoi shetzarach l'kaimai. The Tanna Kama says, if the loiva admits that it's a good shtar, tzarich l'kaimai, you still need to be mekayim. It's still worthless. The shtar is still worth nothing until you can verify the edim. So just because the loiva said it's a good shtar, it's not worth anything. Therefore, they hold if you carry a document on Shabbos, we'll see what it means, a paid document, because here we're talking about something else. We're talking about whether or not it's valid. But we'll see what it means, paroi and loy paroi, in a second. But Tanakama that says you're chai for carrying it is because he holds it's still worthless until you validate the Edom. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Moide B'Shtar Shekosve, Ein Tzarech L'Kaimei. Once the loiva says that it's a good star, it could be used against him. Because, we mentioned that we have this Pesha Asar who a Pesha Hitter, the same person who says it's a good star and makes himself chai for paying, he's going to have to also, he also has the power of saying that he paid it. But the problem is it's in the hand of the Malva. If the Malva is holding on to the star, that in itself shows that it wasn't paid.
Why are people walking around with star on Shabbos? It's business.
Okay, so...
Why are people
left it
walking
in his
around?
toast bag.
Yeah, whatever.
It had it in his pocket.
He wanted to bring it to shul to show the guy that he owes him
On
money.
Shabbos, I can't do business, and you're not allowed to
He wanted to
carry.
remind him. Well, we're talking about whether or not you're not allowed to
On
carry.
Shabbos, you're allowed to carry.
So that's more than one of theirs.
No.
We're also over on maybe it's over that, plus it's over on this.
I'm not joking, seriously.
No, seriously. If you have a star and you want to bring the star for whatever reason,
On Shabbos, you go to him and say, you owe me money.
Okay, so you're bringing it as a bottle
And
star.
nobody's ever talking to you about
And you want
business.
to do. You cannot stop him to
I'm
do.
not talking about the sport.
You could have the question on the Homo Sechel Shabbos. Why would you could have the question on the Homo Sechel Shabbos? Anytime we discuss a malacha, we'll say, why would a person do that malacha? It's usher on Shabbos. We're discussing it here to begin with. This is where it comes to.
We said that answer before. They
Yeah,
did
you're
more than
going
one
to
thing
pay
wrong.
for
He
it.
did one thing wrong, he did something else.
Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda Savar, once the loiva says that it's a good star, so you don't need to be mekayim it anymore. Therefore, it's a valid. It has a use. It can be used to collect the loan. So therefore, you're not allowed to carry it on. You both hold you're not allowed to carry it, but he holds you'd be chayiv for carrying it on Shabbos. Umay ad shaloi paru umisha paru. The brisa that we're talking about here started off saying if it's paid, then it doesn't have a use, and you're not chayiv according to the Rabbanan. If it wasn't paid, then you're chayiv. What is that language that the brisa uses? If we're talking about the machlokes is whether or not you still have to validate the star once the loiva admits that it's a good star or not. What does paid and not paid have to do with it? So the Gemara explains, top of Ayin Tes, ad sheyomer loiva paraiti v'loi paraiti. It means whether or not the loiva, parua, paid and not paid, means if the loiva said he paid or didn't pay. So that's the same machlokes that we're talking about, if the loiva admits that it's a good star and still valid or not. Rava Amar, another way to explain the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda here, if you can carry a paid or unpaid document. Rava Amar, the Kuli Alma Moide B'Shtar Shekosver Shetzarech L'Kaimei. Everybody agrees that that once the loiva says it's a good star, Shetzarech L'Kaimei, you still need to validate it. So it would have no use until it's validated. That would seem like the Chachamim. Rather, so what's the machlokes here? The machlokes is whether or not the malvek could write a shover. Let's say he loses the star. A shover is like a receipt, and the loiva comes to pay up the loan. So how is the loiva sure that tomorrow he's not going to pull out the star and ask him for the money again? So the malva says, okay, I'll give you a receipt. But the loiva might say, I don't want a receipt because now I have to hold on to the receipt forever and ever, because just to make sure you don't come back with the star, and I have to make sure I don't lose it or it doesn't get ruined. So the machlokes here is whether or not the malva could force him to take a receipt, and that should be enough for him to collect the money. Tanakama savar kaisvin shaver. Tanakama holds he could write a shaver, the malva. Once he writes a shaver, so now the star, the original star, is no longer has any use. It's worthless because the loiva has the shaver, has the receipt. For Rabbi Yehuda savar ein kaisvin shaver. Rabbi Yehuda says no. He could say the way I explained. The loiva could say I don't want a shaver, and then so he'll have to make sure he finds the star, and the star has a use, because he can still collect with it, or rather, he paid him up over here, but the star has a use to the loiva. I think it means if it's talking about that he paid, then the star, I think the loiva is going to want to hold on to the star to make sure he's not collected. The malva doesn't pull it out on him again. In any case, if there's no shaver involved, if there's no receipt,
Why don't you just tear it up?
Great point.
he doesn't have it with it. He doesn't have it right now.
I'm giving you the money. I don't have the
But then he finds it. But the question is if he carries.
Why would he give him the money until he gets the star?
When he disposes of
Let's see.
consciousness is going to
Okay, it's too long, the Rashi. So let's go on. Rabbi Yehuda Savar in Kaisin Shaver. Okay, that's right. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Ashi Amar Mepnei Shetzarach Haroisi Lebal Chayv Sheni. This is another reason why. Another way to explain the machlokes between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda, whether or not you're allowed to carry it. So Rabbi Yehuda says you're still chayiv for carrying this shtar even after it was paid on Shabbos. Why? Because he wants to show it to a second Bal Chayv to show that he pays back his loans. Shetzarach Haroisi Lebal Chayv Sheni. He wants to show it to the next time as proof that he's trustworthy. The Amar Le Chazi Gavra the Parana. Look, I'm the person who pays back. You see this document. Okay.
So it was credit rating.
What did you say? Yeah, good credit rating. Or Kedei Lasa. So the Mishnah went on and said, how much leather are you chayiv for carrying on Shabbos? Enough to make the pouch for an amulet. So a kameya, right? Boi minei Rava me Rav Nachman. Rava asked a question from Rav Nachman. Hamaitzi or bekama? If you carry leather, how much leather are you chayiv for carrying on Shabbos? Amar le, he told him. He said to him, Kedetanan, like we learned in our Mishnah, or kedei lasis kameya, enough leather that you could make a pouch for the amulet. And then the Gemara sticks in another thing which doesn't have to do with carrying, which the rest of the Amud is about, but once we're talking about this leather, Hama'avdai, if you tan the leather, you process the leather, Bekama, how much are you chayav for processing? How much leather on Shabbos? Amar le loishna, the same amount. If you process a small amount of leather, enough for the pouch of the kameya, that's going to be, you're going to be chayav for that. Okay, we're on Ayin Tes Amud Aleph, just about almost a quarter of the way down. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Right after the brackets. You'll see that. Can you help me find it over there? Okay, go ahead. La'avdai. Let's say you have some leather which you're going to process. Bekama. So it's untanned leather, but you're going to the reason why you have this leather is to tan it. Bekama. How much leather are you chayiv for carrying that kind of leather? So it's untanned, but you're going to tan it. Marley loishna. Again, the same amount.
Got it.
The same amount. This amount to the pouch of a kameya. Uminah temra. How do I know? This is Rav Nachman speaking. How do I know that it's all the same amount, whether it's tanned or untanned leather? Kedetnan, like we learned in a Mishnah. Hamalabein. If somebody cleans or makes it white. Hamanapet. Somebody who untangles the wool. V'hatzeveya, or dyes the wool. V'hatava. Somebody who spins it into threads, into chutim, into threads, makes it shi'uroi kemolei roichev hasit kafel. The shear for being chayav for processing the wool on Shabbos, any one of these steps in the process, malabein, menapet, seveya, and tava, the shear is the width between the two fingers, your pointer and the middle finger, I think it is, kafel, double. If you spread your two fingers apart and you double that, that's the size of the thread that you'd be chayav for processing on Shabbos, any step of the process. Okay? So we see from here, the Brisa continues, if somebody weaves beis chutin, 2 threads, it's the size of the width between the two fingers. Alma, you see from here, since it's the ultimate stage of processing the wool is making it into thread. So, but anything else along the way, like we said, cleaning it or untangling it or dyeing it, it's all for the purpose of getting to the point of tfiyah, of making it into threads. But we see, even though it wasn't the last stage of the process, it's still the same amount, you're chayav for the same amount as if you were making it into threads. So hachinami, kivan de la'avdai koi, since this leather is going to be tanned, shiura kima'ubed. It's the same amount, you're chayav for carrying out the same amount as already tanned leather. That's Rav Nachman's proof. Let's say you're taking out leather which is not intended to be tanned, it's unprocessed, and you're not going to process it. How much are you chayav for that? So he told him, Rav Nachman told him, again the same amount. So now, the Gemara asks, you're going to tell me now that there's no difference between whether it's tanned or untanned leather? I have a brisa that says not like that. Why? The brisa says hamoitzi samanin sharuyin. If you take out herbs which are which were soaked, kedei tzvaya bahen dugma leira, in the amount of these herbs which were used for dyeing. So they used to soak these herbs and it gave off colors. different herbs for different colors. So if you carried out the amount of these herbs, which were already soaked, the amount that it takes to dye, what do they call it, a swatch, right? Like a sample to show a client the color. So you're chayiv. That's how much, the amount to show a swatch, that's how much you're chayiv for carrying out these dyes on Shabbos. What about these herbs that are not soaked? So you just have like the raw product. Tanan, we have a Mishnah which says, Klipe agayzim, the shells of nuts, but Klipe remainim, the shells of pomegranates, Stis upua, which are other herbs. I think stis is for a blue dye, pua or paya is for a red dye. Kedei litzvaya bohen beged katan. How much are you chai for carrying out those items on Shabbos? Enough kedei litzvaya bohen beged katan lefi savcha. Enough to dye a piece of something that goes on the hat. But in any case, it's bigger than the amount that we said you're chai for carrying out already soaked herbs. So how do you explain that? We see that there is a difference between processed stuff and not processed. It's a bigger shear once it's processed. I'm sorry, if it's not processed, it's a bigger shear. It's a bigger amount that you'd be chayiv for carrying out Shabbos, and if you carry out a smaller amount, you would not be chayiv. Ha'itmar Allah, we were taught on this. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua. Rav Nachman says in the name of Rabba bar Avua, Lafisha ein adam toireach lishrei samanim litzvaya bohen dugma le'ira. A person is not going to go through the bother of dyeing, of soaking these herbs to create the dye just for the amount of a swatch, which is a very small amount. Right? So, similar to what we said yesterday, which we'll see. The Gemara is going to quote what we said yesterday also with the tit. So if it's unprocessed, you're going to carry much more of it because you're not going to go through the process of processing it for a very small amount. But once it's already processed, it's soaked, so then you're carrying out much smaller. That's why it's different. But Rav Nachman will still hold that when it comes to leather, untanned leather and tanned leather, whether it's processed or not processed, it's going to be the same amount for carrying on Shabbos.
Why is leather different from cloth?
Because there's no difference between tanned and untanned leather for the amount that you're carrying it out. With regard to herbs, we said you're not going to. What are you going to do with a small amount of unprocessed herbs? Dye it? You're not going to go through the process of dyeing for such a small amount. If it's already processed, you will carry it because it has a use. You could dye with it. You could dye a swatch, like we said. Okay, and we'll see the same. It's going to be this similar theme throughout the rest of the daf, the rest of the amud. The Gemara asks on Rav Nachman again, V'harei zeroine gino, you have garden seeds. How much are you chayiv for carrying out garden seeds? How much of it do you have to carry to be chayiv? The mekami de zarinhu, before they were planted, so they're just seeds. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, zeroine gino, garden seeds, pachas mika gregeres. You're chayiv if you carry out even less than a gregeres, less than the size of a fig. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, chamisha, 5 seeds. Okay? V'ilu basar de zarinhu tanan. With regard to the seeds after they were planted, we have a Mishnah which says, Zevel v'chol hadak, Zevel fertilizer and thin sand, Kedei l'zavel boy klach shel kruv, enough to fertilize 1 stalk of cabbage. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, that's the opinion that's the shita of Rabbi Akiva. V'chachamim, I remember the chachamim say, Kedei l'zavel krisha, enough to fertilize a leek. Okay, so again, you see a smaller shear, that's a smaller amount of this fertilizer. So seeds, once they've been planted, so it's processed, then you're chayiv for carrying out a smaller amount. It's more chamer. But before it was processed, just seeds, we said before, you could carry out even up to close to a gregeres, which is a bigger amount, a bigger shear. So again, we're challenging Rav Nachman who says leather, whether it's processed or unprocessed, is the same. Here we see processed and unprocessed is not the same. Ha'itmar Allah, we were taught on this, and this is going to be the answer. Amar Rav Papa, Rav Papa says, Ha'dizriya, Ha'daloi zriya. The difference between it is, this was planted, this was not planted. Once again, we have the same concept. The person's not going to go through the trouble of planting 1 or 2 seeds. It's a very small amount. If he's going to plant, he's going to plant the whole garden. So therefore, you're chayiv, you're only chayiv once you carry a bigger amount, like 5 seeds, or we said gregeres. But once it's already planted and it has a use on its own, it's zevel, it's fertilizer. So then, even if you carry out a smaller amount. Now the Gemara challenges Rav Nachman from another case. V'harei tit, this is the one we mentioned yesterday. V'harei tit, you have cement in mekami de legable before it was mixed together with water. Tanya, we learned in a brayso, moedim chachamim l'Rav Shimon b'moitzi shofchen with regard to that, we learned the Chachamim are moida. They agree to Reb Shimon that if you carry out wastewater on Shabbos to Rosh Hashanah, transfer it from a private domain to a public domain, sheshiyurun b'revius. The amount to be chayiv for is if you carry a revius of this wastewater. V'havinan ba. And we dealt with this in the Gemara before. We asked shayfchin l'may chazu. Wastewater. What is the purpose of wastewater? What are you going to do with it? Rabbi Yirmiyah explained, L'gava bohenes atid. It's used to mix the cement. The ilu basar, the gavle tanya, after it was already processed, the tit, the water was mixed in, we have a brayso which tells us, tit kedei lasis behen pikor, how much cement are you chayiv for carrying on Shabbos, the amount to enforce the whole of this crucible. So we see it's a much smaller amount than earlier. We said you have to carry a revius in order to be chayiv, and here the amount of water you need to mix in for the amount of cement you need for the pikur is a very small amount. So why are we saying you have to carry a revius of this wastewater? It seems that you should have to be chayiv. It seems that you could even carry a very small amount of this water in order to be chayiv for carrying it on Shabbos. So the Gemara answers, Hasam nami keda amran. There too, it's the way we said, a person's not going to go through the bother of mixing cement for a very small amount, the amount to make the whole of the crucible. But if it's already made cement, if it's already mixed, so then he'll carry out even a very small amount, and you'd be chayiv for it. So that's going to be the difference. But back to Rav Nachman, untanned and tanned leather will still be the same. Tashma. The Gemara brings a brayso to prove one way or the other. The Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ami Mishmei de Ula. Rabbi Chia bar Ami says in the name of Ula, Shloisha Oires Hey. There are three kinds of leathers: matzah, v'chipa, v'diftera. The Gemara will explain each one. Matzah kemashmoi. Matzah is just the way it sounds. It's like matzah that we eat on Pesach. Doloi maliach. It's not salted. Udoloi kamiach. It doesn't have any flour added to applied to it, this leather. Udoloi afet, and it doesn't have gallnut oils or whatever applied to it. That would be the process of processing leather, tanning leather. They first put salt, then flour, then afet, which is gallnuts. So matzah is unprocessed. It doesn't have any of these three stages done to it. The kama shira, how much would you be chayiv for carrying that on Shabbos? How much of it do you have to carry in order to be chayiv? Tani Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda taught, Kedei lotzer by mashkoilas katana, enough to protect, like a pouch for a small weight. So the way they used to weigh merchandise in those days, food or merchandise, was they had a weight, and based on the weight, they put the item that they were weighing on the other side of it, and the weight was used to weigh it down to see how much it weighs. But the weight was delicate. It was made of like soft metals, I think like lead or other things like that. So they used to put it in a leather, cover it with leather in order to protect it. So
it wouldn't wear down.
Yeah, so it wouldn't wear down. So that's how much. If you carry out the amount of this leather, unprocessed leather, the amount for the small weight, you'd be chayiv on Shabbos. How big is this small weight? V'kama Amar Abaya. Abaya says rivo de pumpadisa, a quarter of a lug of pumpadisa, and some say it's a half a lug, but this litra, Rashi says, like a liter in pumpadisa. Okay, that's how big the small weight was. Chipa, the next type of leather that we mentioned here, it's a little bit more processed. The maliach, it's salted, v'loy kamiach, v'loy afetz, but it didn't have flour or gallnut applied to it. So it's a little bit more processed. The kama shiroi, how much is its shear? How much do you have to carry of that in order to be chayiv? Keditanan, like we learned in the Mishnah. Or, this is I guess that we normally refer to, kedei lases kemeya. In order, enough to make a pouch of an amulet, that's how much you'd be chayiv for on Shabbos. Okay, diftera, which was the third kind of leather, the meliach ukemiach v'loy afetz. It's one more stage. It's salted. It has flour applied to it, but not gallnuts. How much of that? V'kama shiuroi. How much is its amount in order to be chayiv for carrying it on Shabbos? Kedei lichtai v'lav es haget. If you carry out a piece of this kind of leather enough to write a get, and Rashi explains it's not a complete get. It's just a small part of the get, the main part, the name, and the part that says Gufay shall get. Rashi says, Harei at muteres l'chol adam, the part that says you're permitted to marry any person. Ushma, his name and her name. V'ha'edim, the witnesses, the zman, the date. V'shir zeh katan mikulan. This is the smallest shear that we mentioned here. So we were going down. As it gets more processed, the amount that you'd be chayiv for carrying that kind of leather on Shabbos becomes smaller and smaller. Katani miyas, we see that we learned in this brisa, kedei lotzer by mishkolas katana. We even mentioned in this brisa the bigger shear of holding this small weight, which we said was a quarter of the pupadisa, a quarter of the liter of pupadisa. So we see that the processing stages of the leather, the amount that you're chayiv for carrying on Shabbos vary according to the processing stage where you're up to. So you see there should be a difference between processed leather and unprocessed leather. So it's a question on Rav Nachman. Amar Abaya. Oh, I'm sorry. This is just part of that line before. Lotzer boy mishkolas katana Amar Abaya river the pupadisa. That's what size it is. The leather. We see a big size and we see a small size if it's more processed. Hasam b'bishula. So the Gemara answers the leather in question over there, where you see you could use a big size for this weight, is talking about where it's just freshly skinned off of the animal, so it's still not ready for processing because it's still too moist. The way I understand, lach, Rashi says, lach k'moy shehufshat, the way it was taken off of the animal, kari b'shula. So it's still not ready to be processed. So it's like a different product. But Rav Nachman was talking about leather that was ready to be processed but not processed, or tan, or leather that was already tanned. So they have the same shear for carrying it on Shabbos, the same amount. The Gemara asked one more question on Rav Nachman. Habeget shloisha lemidris hasak dalad al dalid ha'or hey al hey mapitz vav al vav. We said this price Mishnah I think 2 days ago. We had it with regard to tumah of medris, a tamei person, a zav that sits on a piece of material, or a number of different materials mentioned in this Mishnah, it becomes tamei medris, which becomes a high level of tumah, if he or she sits on it when they're tamei. So what's the smallest size that becomes tamei? The beged, the cloth, is 3 by 3 tefachim. The sackcloth is 4 by 4 tefachim. Leather, we see over here, is hey al hey, 5 by 5 tefachim, which is a big shear. Okay, the Tani Allah. And then mapitz, we said, is a mat is vav vav vav. Bein lemedris, bein lemeis. Whether it's for tomei medris or a mace, if a mace touches it. The Tani Allah, we were taught on this brisa, habeged v'hasak v'ha'ar, the cloth, the sackcloth, and the leather, kishir l'tumah, kach shir l'haitzah. The same amount that it would become, you need the minimum size to become tamei. That's the same amount of the minimum to be chayiv for carrying it on Shabbos. So you see over here that this leather, this R is 5 by 5. So, it's a question on Rav Nachman that says that it's a much smaller amount. The amount or is it a question on our Mishnah maybe? No, okay, it's unprocessed leather. That's what we're talking about. It's not tanned leather, and you see it's a much bigger amount.
It proves a bigger amount.
Right, it proves that if it's processed, that it's a bigger amount. So the Gemara answers, Hahu bikurtuvla. That's talking about a different kind of leather which was boiled and made very hard. It's used for furniture, for chairs or tables or something like that. So it's a whole different item in question. So Rav Nachman still would hold that tanned or untanned leather is the same amount for carrying on Shabbos. But this kind of leather that we're talking about here is a whole different kind of leather. Okay. Now the Gemara Ayin Testament Beis discusses the next part of the Mishnah. We said how much cloth, parchment, are you chayiv for carrying on Shabbos? Kedei lichtay v'lav parsha katana shebetfilin. We said enough to write a small parsha betfilin, which is Shema Yisrael. V'raminhu, frekti Gemara. The Gemara asks from a brisa. It says in a different brisa, klaf v'duchsostrus. It doesn't take that much time to practice that word and pronounce it correctly. Duchsostrus. If you have klaf and duchsostrus, klaf is parchment. Duchsostrus is a different kind of leather. When you skin the animal, the hide, you split it into two. The outer half is called klaf, parchment, and the inner part, the part closer to the body of the animal, is called duchsostrus. So both of these, klaf and duchsostrus, kedei lichtov alav mezuzah. How much are you chayiv for carrying it out on Shabbos? Enough to write on it a mezuzah. So right over here we have a contradiction. This brisa says it's enough to write a mezuzah, because klaf to write a mezuzah, which is more than a tefillin, because you have shema and v'haya im shemaya. And in the Mishnah we said klaf only if you carry out the amount to write on it of the smallest parsha in tefillin, you're already chayiv. So how do we explain this? My mezuzah, the Gemara says, when we say mezuzah, we mean mezuzah shevet tefillin. Mezuzah doesn't mean a mezuzah that's hanging on the doorpost. It means one of the parshas in the tefillin. Frak the Gemara of a kari lehu tefillin mezuzah. Do we call tefillin mezuzah? Yes, we do. V'hatanya, and we'll show this from a brisa. Here, v'hatanya is a proof, not a question. It says ritzuos tefillin im hatefillin. With regard to tuma, there was a takana made by the chachamim, because in order to what happened was truma has to remain tahar. It can't become tameh. So it has to be kodesh. So people used to store their truma together with svarim. So, because it has kedusha, both the truma has kedusha and the svarim have kedusha. But what happened was mice used to come and eat the food and also nibble away at the parchment, so it ruined the svarim. So the chachamim made a takana that svarim could make things tameh. So if your truma touches the svarim, it becomes tameh. Similarly, if you touch the svarim, you'll become tameh. So or maybe it doesn't apply to people, but the food at least will become tameh. So the Gemara says here, we bring the brisa which says ritzuos tefillin im hatefillin. If you touch the straps of the tefillin when they're together with the tefillin, metames es hayadayim. Yeah, it makes hands tameh. Bifnei atzman. If the straps are without the tefillin, they're detached. Ein metames es hayadayim. They don't make your hands tameh. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Aimer. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda says, he argues, Mishum Reb Shimon, in the name of Reb Shimon, Hanageya b'ritzua tahar. Ad sheyiga b'ktzitza. If you touch the strap of the tefillin, even when it's attached to the tefillin, you're tahar, unless you touch the actual box of the tefillin, the bias, the ktzitza. Okay? Rabbi Zakkai Mishmai, Rabbi Zakkai says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Oimer, tahar ad sheyiga b'mezuzah atzma. You're tahar until you touch the actual mezuzah. And over here, it has to be that mezuzah is referring to the tefillin, the parsha inside the tefillin. So you see that yes, mezuzah, we do call the parsha in the tefillin mezuzah. So, okay, so that answers that. But the Gemara asks, "V'hamid katani seifa," this brisa that was quoted on the top of the Amud to ask the stira on klaf. The end of that brisa says, "Klaf kedei lichtlev alav parsha katana shebetfilin shehi shema Yisrael." How much klaf are you chayav for carrying out on Shabbos? Enough to write the small parsha in the tefillin, which is Shema Yisrael, Michlal. We see from there, from the second teaching in the brisa, the ratio at the beginning of the brisa, when it said mezuzah atzma askinon, it said mezuzah. It must be talking about mezuzah, because the end of the brisa said tefillin. So it specified tefillin there. So obviously we're not talking about tefillin in the beginning of the brisa. So the Gemara explains the brisa. No, Hachi Katani. This is how we understand the brisa. The brisa starts off like this: Klaf v'duchsustrus shiruan bekama. How much are you chayav for carrying out klaf and duchsustrus? Now we explain. Each one has its own share. Duchsustrus kedei lichtav alav mezuzah. If you carry out enough duchsustrus, which is this inner parchment, enough to write on it a mezuzah, that's how much you chayav for carrying it. Klaf, when it comes to klaf, the outer skin, kedei lichtav alav parsha katana shebetfilin shehi shema Yisrael. It's a smaller amount that you're chayav for. The amount to write the parsha of Shema Yisrael, which is in the tefillin on it, that's how much you'd be chayav. That size parchment. Okay. Amar Rav. Rav says. He teaches us that duchsustus harehi keklaf. Duchsustus is the same as klaf. What does this mean? Ma klaf kaisvin olav tefillin. Just like on parchment you can write tefillin. Af duchsustus kaisvin olav tefillin. Also on duchsustus, also on the inner half of the skin, you can write tefillin. So the Gemara asks, Tnan klaf kedei lichtoi parsha katana shebetfillin shehi shema Yisrael. We were taught that in order to be chayav for carrying out klaf on Shabbos, you have to carry out the amount to write the parsha of tefillin on it. Not a bigger amount, a smaller amount, or more machmer. It must be that the normal use of this klaf is only for tefillin and not duchsustrus. Rav says duchsustrus is like klaf. So you could use. Oh, right. You could use. It seems from here that klaf is the normal thing to write tefillin on, and not duchsustrus. right? So it's not like Rav. Rav says you could write tefillin on klaf or duchsustras. Here it seems from this halacha that you could carry out the size that were given for klaf for Shabbos is referenced by the parsha of tefillin. It must be that only klaf was normal for writing tefillin on it. The Gemara answers, mitzvah. That's only the preferred way to do the mitzvah. The preferred way to write tefillin is on klaf, but it also works. It's also okay on duchsustras. Tashma. The Gemara brings a brisa to prove. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. We have halacha l'Moshe Misinai that says tefillin al haklaf u'mezuzah al duchsustras. Tefillin on klaf and mezuzah on duchsustras. Right? Klaf b'makam basar. Oh, the halacha Moshe Misinai also teaches us that klaf b'makam basar, duchsustras b'makam seyar. So the way we explain, you split the hide into two parts. The klaf is the outer part of the animal, and the duchsustras is the inner part. But still, there's a specific side that you have to write it on. When it comes to klaf, you have to write it b'makam basar on the inner side, the side closer to the flesh of the animal. Duchsustras, when you're writing on duchsustras, which is a mezuzah, you write it on the outer side b'makam seyar, on the side of the hair, the side closer to the outside of the body. So basically, the klaf and the duchsustras, when they're together on the animal, are touching. It's the sides that are touching each other. When you split it, it's very close to each other. The difference must be very small between the two. B'makam basar, duchsustras b'makam seyar. So we see here clearly from this halacha l'Moshe Misinai that tefillin has to be on klaf and mezuzah has to be on duchsustras and not the other way around. L'mitzvah, that's again the preferred way to do it, but it still works if you do it the other way. V'hatanya, how could that be? We learned in a brisa shina pasul. If you change it around, in other words, you change tefillin to duchsustras or mezuzah to klaf pasul. So the Gemara says no. On mezuzah. That's only going on mezuzah. If you change the prescribed type of parchment for mezuzah. But for tefillin, you could change. So Rav would be correct that you could write tefillin on duchsustras. For Hatanya, Frekti Gemara, it says in a brisa, Shina bazeh ubazeh, pasul, which we understand to mean if you switch by either one, by mezuzah or by tefillin. Gemara says, Idi amezuzah. No. Again, bazeh ubazeh, by this and by this, both mean mezuzah. But what does it mean by this and by this? One is talking about that you switched, you wrote it on, there's two kinds of ways you could change the norm for writing a mezuzah. It's supposed to be written on duchsustras, and we said duchsustras has to be written on the outer side of it. Okay, so there's two ways to change it. Either you change the type of skin, which is you change it to klaf, or you could also change it by changing the side which you're writing it on. You could write it on the inner side rather than the outer side. So when we said shina bozeh bozeh, you changed by both. It means both by mezuzah, but one of two kinds of changes. V'hadikasvinu aklaf b'makam seir, you switched to klaf, but you still wrote it on the outer side. Inami aduchsustras, you wrote it on duchsustras, which is the proper material for mezuzah, but b'makam basar, you switched it to the other side, which was the inner side rather than the outer side. So either change will make it pasul. That's one way to explain bozeh ubozeh. V'ibai sema, the Gemara says another way we could explain bozeh, shina bozeh ubozeh, tanoihi. It's shina bozeh ubozeh is machlekes tanoim. The Tanya shina bozeh ubozeh pasul. Rabbi Yaakov machshir mishum Rabbi Chia bar Chanina v'amrila mishum Rabbi Yaakov bar Chanina. One opinion in the Tanoim say that if you switch by this or by this, it could mean that tefillin and mezuzah, but it's a machlekes Tanoim. And our Rav that says you could switch by mezuzah, by tefillin, must be going according to the other Tana, that you're allowed to switch. Okay, Rav Papa Amar. Rav Papa says, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav Papa Amar, Rav Papa, okay, again. Rav Papa Amar Rav, the Amar Ketana. Oh, Rav Papa says that Rav says like the Tana de Bey Menashe. He holds like the Tana de Bey Menashe. What does the Tana de Bey Menashe say? The Tana de Bey Menashe, Kosva ala Niyor, va'al hamatlis, pesula. If you write it on paper or matlis, I don't remember what matlis is.
Cloth.
What is it?
Cloth.
Cloth, okay. Psula, it's pasul. Al ha-klaf, al ha-gvil. If you wrote it on parchment, on klaf or gvil, which is, I think, the whole skin, not separated, v'al duchsustras, ksheira, or on duchsustras, then it's kosher. Kosvamai. So what are we talking about here? What did you write on these materials? Ilema mezuzah. If it says you're talking about mezuzah klaf mi kasvinon, could you write mezuzah on klaf? No, you can't. We said mezuzah is only on duchsustras. Elolav tefillin. We must be talking about that you wrote tefillin. So it must be that you're allowed to write tefillin even on Duchsustras. That would be a proof to Rav. So the Gemara asks, according to that explanation, tefillin are gvil, because we also mentioned gvil as one of the materials that are okay. Gvil is the hide before it's split. Mika Svina, could you write gvil on tefillin? Tefillin on gvil? Ella must be kitanya hahi b'sefer Torah. That whole brayso is talking about a sefer Torah, not tefillin and not mezuzah, so we can't bring a proof to Rav from there. Okay. Now the Gemara says, let's bring a proof to Rav. The brayso teaches us like this: tefillin shabalu, tefillin that became ruined, worn out. The Sefer Torah Shabala, or a Sefer Torah that becomes worn out, Ein Eisin Mehen Mezuzah. You cannot make a mezuzah out of them. Because you can't lower the level of kedusha. Sefer Torah obviously has the highest level of kedusha, then goes tefillin, then goes mezuzah. So if Sefer Torah or mezuzah became ruined, you can't go cut up the parchment and make it like, let's say you cut out the part of Shema Yisrael and V'hayim Shemaya, I want to roll it up into your mezuzah. You can't do that because you're lowering the level of kedusha. Mezuzah has a lower level of kedusha. So the Gemara analyzes this. Taima de ein maridin. That's only the reason why you can't change it from a higher level, from a Sefer Torah or Tefillin to mezuzah, is because of this halacha of ein maridin, of not going down in levels of kedusha. Ha maridin. If not for that fact, if you would be allowed to go down the levels of kedusha, oisin, you would be allowed to do it, right? So let's see. The ksiva amai. What is this written on? Lav de ksiva ad duchsustras. It must be, it's written on duchsustras, because you wouldn't be allowed to have a mezuzah if it wasn't on duchsustras, because that's the right type of material for mezuzah. So it must be you had tefillin that were written on duchsustras, and it got ruined, and now you want to make it into mezuzah. So if you wouldn't have the problem of lowering the level of kedusha, you'd be allowed to make a tefillin into mezuzah. But what you see here is that you're allowed to write tefillin initially on duchsustras, so it would be a proof to Rav. The Gemara says, boy, no, you can't bring a proof like that. Why? The ksiva ala klaf. You wrote the tefillin on klaf. And now you want to make the tefillin into mezuzah. So the Gemara says, mezuzah klaf mikasvinan. Could I have a mezuzah that's made of klaf? So the Gemara says, yes, you could. V'hatanya, we have a brayso like that. Again, v'hatanya is a proof, not a question here. Kasva al haklaf. If you wrote a mezuzah on klaf, al haniyar al hamatlis, or other materials, psula. It's puzzle. Amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, Rabbi Meir hayakais v'alaklaf mipnei shemishtameres, because it's stronger and it holds better. Rabbi Meir used to write his mezuzah on klaf. So we finally found an opinion in the Rishonim, in the Tanoim. We found Rabbi Meir that used to write his mezuzah even on klaf. So says the Gemara, Hashta de Asis Lahachi. Once we have this opinion with this shita of Rabbi Meir, we understand Rav differently. Hashta de Asis Lahachi LaRav Nami Loitemo Duchsustras Harehi Klaf. The way we quoted Rav's teaching originally was that Duchsustras is the same as klaf. So that means you could write tefillin on Duchsustras, just like klaf. We don't say that. Ela ema, rather you say klaf harehu kiduchsustras. The other way around. Klaf becomes like duchsustras. Ma duchsustras kaisvin alav mezuzah. Just like you could write a mezuzah on duchsustras, af klaf, even also on klaf, on parchment, you could write a kaisvin alav mezuzah. You could write a mezuzah. Okay?